All right, can everyone see my slides and hear me? Excellent. Now I'm facing you. I put the window with 50 faces in front of me so I can see the audience instead of my slides. Thanks a lot for having me here. It's a great pleasure to have this reunion with the Cambridge community. In this talk, I'll present about high-order readings of depth questions, and ultimately, I'll talk about asymmetry between disjunctions and conjunctions in these readings. The majority of this talk is based on paper to appear in Natural Language Semantics, even though this paper is already in print, but I still feel that many of the issues are new to me. So I look forward to hear your questions and comments. To get started, let's see some basic facts about questions and answers. In general, a depth question calls for an answer that names an entity in the denotation of the depth complement, or a generous quantifier that ranges over a subset of those entities. And this requirement is especially robust to same with short answers in discourse. For example, in 1, which student came, saying Andy implies that Andy is a student. Saying Andy or Billy implies that both Andy and Billy are students. To capture this question-answer relation, we usually treat depth phrases as functions over first-order predicates, either as extension quantifier or a lambda abstractor. And the domain for quantification or abstraction is the set denoted by the depth complement. So for example, using this schema, we see that a depth phrase combined with a first-order function denoted by the scope, and it binds a E-type variable inside the question nucleus. There are many options to compose and define questions. And in this talk, I'm going to follow category approaches just for the sake of convenience of tracking the relation between questions and answers. And the core idea of this work is independent from the choice of the framework. So in category approaches, a depth question is defined as a function that is defined for entities in the denotation of the depth complement. For example, in 2, which student came? Which student serves as function domain restrictor? It combines with a first-order function that is defined for any entity and returns a more restrictive function that is only defined for entities that are atomic students. And in this way, we can easily categorize question-answer relation the simple function-argument relation. So as in A, applying the question denotation to the individual Andy returns the inference that Andy came defined only if Andy is a student. If the answer names the generous quantifier, then the question-answer relation gets flip-flopped into an argument function relation. So applying Andy or Billy to the question denotation returns that Andy or Billy came defined only if both Andy and Billy are students. For some shortcuts, I'm going to call the function-like denotation of a question a Q function, and the domain of a Q function called as Q domain. In short, the discussion on this slide implies that the Q domain of the depth question is a subset of the denotation of the depth complement. So far, the discussion has been focused on first-order readings of questions. But as I will show in this talk, in some cases, a depth question must be interpreted with a high-order reading in which this question calls for an answer that names a generous quantifier. So therefore, the goal of this talk is to investigate the distribution and the derivation of these high-order readings. As a roadmap, I'm going to start by presenting evidence for high-order readings, and then talk about derivations and distribution constraints of these readings, and especially an asymmetry between disjunctions and conjunctions in those readings. And finally, I'll talk about semantic constraints on higher order answers. So that is the map. Before I start, let me quickly review some basics about coordinations and generous quantifiers that most of us have learned in intro semantics. For coordinations, disjunctions over set denote expressions are treated as unions. Entities, because they are not sets, they have to be Montagu lifted before being disjoint. So in 3a, any probability is defined as the union between two multi-covalent individuals. For conjunctions, we usually say that they're ambiguous between intersections as in 4A and summations as in 4B. And when we say higher order Boolean coordinations, we're referring to the union rating of disjunctions and the intersection rating of conjunctions. For generous quantifiers, the most important notion for today is Linguistics. For any pi of type ETT and any set of entities A, we say that pi lives on A if and only if whenever pi holds for B, pi holds for the intersection between A and B. And furthermore, we say pi ranges over A if and only if A is the smallest even set of pi. If this is the first time you say this, let's see some examples, but the idea is very, very simple. For the Boolean coordination like A or B, A and B, it ranges over the set including two individuals A, B. For the quantificational determiner phrase like some book, every book, no book, some books, most books, they range over the set denoted by the NP complement. Book, books, and that's it. Right? Part A is on evidence for higher order readings. When we say that a question has a first order rating, we're going to make two predictions in regards to answers that names a generous quantifier. First, this generous quantifier must be interpreted with wide scope with respect to any scope expressions within the question it appears. And second, the proposition denoted by this answer is not in the question answer space. It is derived as the Boolean combination of the propositions in the answer space. As I will show in this part, both predictions have counter examples. First, based on non-reducibility in questions with necessity models, I'll present evidence for Boolean disjunctions and extension quantifiers. Second, based on absence of uniqueness effects in questions with corrective predicates, I'll show evidence for Boolean conjunctions and universal quantifiers. The diagnostic for disjunctions was first provided by Benjamin Spector. He observes that disjunctions and extension quantifiers can completely address box questions with necessity models. For example, in 6. Which books does John have to read? The French novels or the Russian novels? This disjunction has two ratings, as the partial answer says, French novels or Russian novels, I don't know which exactly. And also can be read as a complete answer where you read disjunction under the scope of the necessity model. French novels or Russian novels, the choice is up to him. So in this case, there's no particular book that John has to read. He just needs to choose between French novels and Russian novels, and that's it. And similarly, we see the same ambiguity with extension quantifiers. Which books does John have to read? At least 2 books by Balzac, any 2 books. To derive the narrow scope interpretations of the answers, we wanted the question to have a higher order rating. So the question in 6 can be paraphrased as in 7. Which GQ pi over books is such that John has to read pi? Spector says to derive this rating, the adapted phrase branches over high order meanings and binds a high order trace pi across the modal F2. Composing this logical form returns a high order function that is defined for the set of generous quantifiers that range over subsets of books. Applying this high order function to the Boolean disjunction F or R returns the narrow scope disjunctive inference that it has to be the case that John read F or R defined only if both F and R are books. And that's exactly what we want. More generally speaking, box questions provide evidence for Boolean disjunctions because their answer space is not closed under disjunction. So the 2 boxes illustrate the answer space for the 2 questions. On the left, for the episodic question, what did John read? The disjunctive answer is semantically equivalent to the disjunction of the 2 individual answers. So that's what the arrows mean, meaning the entanglement relations between these 2 propositions. In contrast, for the box question, what does John have to read? The disjunctive answer is semantically weaker than the disjunction of the two individual answers. So in the case that John has to read, he just needs to choose between A or B, not that he has to read A, not that he has to read B, the disjunctive answer becomes the strongest, the true answer to this question. To put this idea in a different way, we can say that the Q function of the box question is not reducible relative to disjunctions. So for any generous quantifier pi and function theta, we say that theta is reducible pi if and only if the inference derived by combining these two things together is equivalent to the inference derived by forcing pi to take y scope relative to theta. For example, in 8, when you say John has to read A or B, it's not semantically equivalent to the disjunction of John has to read A, John has to read B. So the Q function of the box question is not reducible relative to disjunctions. In contrast, John has to read A and B can be reduced into the conjunction of these two atomic sentences. This contrast also shows us that we're not able to use non-reducibility to validate whether we have Boolean conjunctions in the Q domain of the question. And therefore, we need a separate set of evidence to rule in Boolean conjunctions. The evidence comes from questions with collective predicates, and specifically which I call as startlingly collective predicates. Quantized phrasal predicates such as formed a team, co-authored 2 papers. Those predicates are startlingly collective. They admit a collective reading, but not a covered reading or distributive reading. So for illustration, think about this scenario. We have 4 children, A, B, C, D. A, B form the team, C, D form the team. Yeah. In this context, it is true to say the children form the teams, plural. But it's false to say the children formed a team, or the children formed one team. Because this sentence requires the 4 children to be inside the same team. Yeah, so this is what I mean by stubborn collectivity. Now let's think about sentence embeddings. In 10a, this sentence embeds 9b under affective verb no. John knows that the children form the team. This sentence is infelicitous because it's subject to presupposition failure with the affective presupposition of no. No embeds a false sentence. But what is interesting is that if you think about the interrogative counterpart, John knows which children form the team. This sentence is perfect. Yeah, John knows which children form the team. And in particular, this sentence implies that John knows that AB form the team and CD form the team. He knows a conjunctive inference. So here is the puzzle. In 10c, where does the conjunctive closure come from? Clearly, it shouldn't come from the predicate. And also, it should not come from anywhere within the question clears. Otherwise, we should expect 10a to be good as well. So my reply is that the conjunctive closure is supplied by the double phrase. This double phrase finds a high-order trace and ranges over high-order meanings. So in 11th sentence, the question is interpreted with a high-order rating, which generous quantifier pi over children is such that pi form the team. The composition is that which children finds a high-order trace pi in nucleus. And this LF gives a high-order Q function, which is defined for generous quantifiers that range over subsets of children. Applying this Q function to a Boolean conjunction like the Boolean conjunction of multi-grouping AB, multi-grouping CD, we get exactly the conjunctive inference that we want. I also want to mention that Danny has an alternative analysis. So instead of saying that double phrases here can range over Boolean conjunctions, he assumes that the double phrases can range over higher order polarities, and this is also a feasible option. One might argue that why not saying that the conjunctive closure is from an operation outside the question root, such as the answer coded operator. So for example, if we assume Ham's answer coded operator, this answer coded operator returns the conjunction of all the true answers. In a given scenario, let's say we have two true answers, AB from the team, CD from the team, and then answer coded operator just returns the conjunction of these two. Why not? Well, this option is insufficient because it cannot capture the contrast in 13 with respect to uniqueness. 13a is the sentence we just saw. John knows which children form the team. And 13b is that we're adding a numeral modifier inside the question, inside the Dabbage phrase. John knows which two children form the team. And this sentence is not good because it implies a uniqueness inference that only two of the children formed any team, and that contradicts with the context we described. So, given this contrast, we can conclude that the numeral modifier in the Dabbage phrase makes high-order conjunctive answers unavailable and gives rise to a uniqueness effect. Uniqueness effects in questions are usually explained in terms of Daya's presupposition. Daya proposes that a question is defined only if it has the strongest true answer, which is the true answer that entails all the true answers. So for the simplex plural question, which children form the team, in the context we have three true answers, AB from the team, CD from the team, and the conjunctive is 2. And the conjunctive answer on the top is the strongest true answer to this question. It tells all of the true answers. And this answer is available as long as we say that the plural Dabbage phrase can quantify over higher order conjunctions. For the numeral modified question, which two children form the team, the uniqueness effect is expected as long as we say that numeral modified Dabbage phrases cannot range over higher order conjunctions. So in the same scenario, we have these two true answers, but there's no strongest true answer to this question. I want to mention that there are many other options to derive uniqueness. So the analysis doesn't have to be dependent on the particular analysis of uniqueness provided by Daya. However, no matter how we try to explain uniqueness effect, the bottom line is that we want a way to capture the contrast between simplex plural Dabbage phrases and numeral modified Dabbage phrases, especially explain why numeral modifiers in Dabbage phrases can block the existence of higher order conjunctions. Yeah. So this is part A. As interim summary, I argue that high order readings arise if the Dabbage phrase ranges over high order meanings and binds a high order trace. In the high order reading, the Q domain includes basically three sets of things. Based on non-reducibility with respect to generous quantifiers in box questions, I provide evidence for Boolean disjunctions and existential quantifiers. Based on the absence of uniqueness in questions with a stubbornly collective predicate, I find evidence for Boolean conjunctions and universal quantifiers. And finally, something that escaped is that if we combine these two diagnostics together, we should also add Boolean coordinations of those quantifiers above to the Q domain of the question. So this is part A. Part B is on distributing higher order readings. Previously, we have said that uniqueness effects show that singular and numeral Dabbage questions cannot have answers naming Boolean conjunctions. So it's bad to say, I know which book John read, book A and book B. It's bad to say, I know which two children from the team, the two boys and the two girls. Based on this uniqueness effect, one plausible conjecture is to say maybe singular and numeral Dabbage phrases cannot range over high order meanings. And later I'll show that this conjecture might be a little too strong, but this seems to be plausible for now. In contrast to the numeral modifier 2, PP modifiers very interesting, they do not trigger uniqueness effects. So in 16, I know which children who are in the group of 2 form the team. The 2 boys and 2 girls. And this is very funny because numeral 2 and the PP modifier in a group of 2, meaning-wise, seem to be very similar. But only the numeral modifier triggers uniqueness effect. So this contrast shows that the formation of a high-order domain is somehow sensitive to the internal structure of the Davidge complement. To capture this contrast, I'm going to assume the structure of Davidge phrase as follows. At the very bottom of the tree, the small np denotes a semi-lattice structure, which is a set of entities closed under summation formation. And furthermore, in the presence of a numera, the number head has a cardinality predicate that checks cardinality. So it returns a set of entities that satisfy certain cardinality requirement. And next, at the phi head, there's number feature singular or plural. If you have singular, you're going to check atomicity. And on the top of phi p, we have external modifiers such as PP modifier relative clauses. Okay, so this is the structure of the Davidge phrase. To derive high-order readings, I assume that there is an edge shifter that should be applied locally to the small np. It converts a set of entities into a set of generous quantifiers that range over subsets of these entities. So this is the new assumption. So now let's see how this analysis predicts the contrast. First, the edge shifter cannot be used in singular nouns. Applying edge to small np returns a set of generous quantifiers which are non-atomic and conflict with the atomicity requirement of the singular feature. Well, for the plural noun, the plural feature is semantically vacuous, where if you want to pursue exclusive story, it just says let's root out all the atomic elements. And so it doesn't matter, we can still apply edge shifter without getting into any trouble. For the numeral modified noun, the edge shifter also cannot be used in numeral modified noun, but for a different reason. In the numeral modified noun, the number head has a card predicate which checks the cardinality of the set of the elements in the set that combines with. It doesn't make too much sense to say the cardinality of a generous quantifier, and therefore it cannot combine with a set of generous quantifiers. In contrast, for PP modifiers are joined to NP or phi p externally. So edge shifter can still apply locally within phi p. While for PP, all we need to do is just type lifting, apply argument lift, so that it derives, so that so that we get a PP denoting a set of generous quantifiers, and then phi p and PP can combine standardly using predicate modification. So, summary for part B. The derivation says applying the edge shifter to the small np within Davidge complement returns a Davidge restrictor denoting set of generous quantifiers. The front Davidge phrase finds a high order trace inside the question nucleus. For the distribution, I argue that if the Davidge complement is singular or numeral modified, the atomicity and cardinality requirements of singular and card block the application of the edge shifter, making higher order readings unavailable. Part C. Part C is a focus on, I think, probably the most interesting part of this talk is on the symmetry between disjunctions and conjunctions. The observation is that modalized questions with a singular or numeral modified Davidge phrase rejects elided conjunctive answers but admits disjunctive answers. So previously in part B, we said singular and numeral modified Davidge phrase don't license high order readings because the application of the edge shifter is blocked by the atomicity requirement of the singular feature and the cardinality requirement of the card predicate. That's what we said in the last session. But there is a puzzle. Thinking about box question again. As direct answers to singular or numeral modified box questions, elide disjunctions are not as bad as elide conjunctions. I know which book John has to read, book A or book B. Sounds okay. And similarly, I know which books John has to read, the two French novels, the two French books, or the two Russian books. Still fine. And the availability of this kind of narrow scope disjunctive answer is even more readily available for answers in discourse. Which textbook should I use for this class? Hammond-Kreiser or Median Grammar? The choice is up to you. Yeah. So now we have two puzzles. One, why disjunctive high-order answers are acceptable despite that the Debye complement is singular or numeral modified. And second, why these questions admit elide disjunctions but not elide conjunctions. Those puzzles also extend to questions with a possibility model, which I call them as diamond questions. Diamond questions are most well known for their mission sum readings, but this is not a focus for this talk. Instead, I'm going to look at mission all answers to diamond questions, which are the answers that specify all the feasible options. So the mission all answer to a diamond question can be expressed either as an elide conjunction or as a free choice disjunction. What can I use as a textbook for this class? Conjunctive mission all says Hammond-Kreiser and Median Grammar. Or use disjunctive mission all Hammond-Kreiser or Median Grammar. The choice is up to you. Even though we're using conjunction in A, disjunction in B, the two answers express exactly the same meaning. We have these two options. For our textbook for this class. I argue that the readings accepting conjunctive mission all and the readings accepting disjunctive mission all are derived from different logical forms that have distinct questioning clears. In all those readings, they are high-order readings in the sense that the Debye phrase binds a high-order trace pi. The conjunctive reading is acceptable when pi takes wide scope relative to the possibility model, and the disjunctive reading is acceptable when pi is associated with a free choice trinity operator regardless of the scope of pi. And for the free choice trinity operator, I'm assuming a covert operator do, which is similar to the Mandarin particle do. For this audience, the semantics I'm giving here is very similar to Fox recursive exhaustifier, except that it does not give rise to an exclusive inference. There are many interesting facts about do. What matters for now here is that when do applies to a diamond disjunction, like possible phi or psi, possible phi or possible psi, it will convert this disjunction into wide scope conjunction. That's it. So it gives rise to a universal free choice interpretation. And here I explain my ideas more concretely. On the left, I gave the tree that specifies the structure of the questioning clears, and on the right, I specify this picture illustrates the answer space of the question, and this answer space considers four propositions derived by Boolean conjunction, metagrouping A, metagrouping B, and Boolean disjunction. When pi takes wide scope over the possibility model, the conjunctive answer is the strongest true answer to the question. It entails all the true answers. With the presence of do, everything else is the same, except that the disjunctive answer now is strengthened into a free choice inference, which is equivalent to the conjunction of two individual answers. So that's why disjunctive answer is also acceptable. So this is a reading where conjunctive mission or disjunctive mission are both acceptable. When pi takes scope under the possibility model, we still have the option to derive mission or reading as long as there is a do in the structure. So even though the conjunctive answer is out because of a contradiction, the disjunctive answer is semantically equivalent to the disjunction of the two individual answers, and it is strongest true answer to the question. Okay? So these are the three ways to derive the machine all radiance to a diamond question. These are just background. Now coming back to the puzzles. Hirsch and Schwarz observed that a singular diamond question admits a multi-choice rating if the uniqueness inference invoked by the singular adaptive phrase has a narrow scope. In 24, which letter could be missing in FO_M? This question can be understood as which X is such that X could be the unique letter missing FO_M. And this question can be responded by providing two options. The unique missing letter could be A, and the unique missing letter could be R. Here, this example considers full answer. If we look at elided answer, there will be a very interesting contrast. Elided multi-choice answers to singular diamond questions must be disjunctions. Which letter could be missing in FO_M? Good to say A or R, but not good to say A and R. Similarly, which textbook can I use for this class? Good to say Hamann-Kreisler or Millen-Graham. Bad to say Hamann-Kreisler and Millen-Graham. And semi-contrast is same with numeral modified diamond questions. And similarly, not just for double-edged questions, the same effect is observed with how many questions. Gentile and Schwarz observed that in how many questions, possibility models can obviate violations of global uniqueness. Uniqueness is shown in 27. How many students solve this problem together? Bad to respond by saying 2 and 3. However, in the presence of possibility model, we can respond with a multi-choice answer. How many students are allowed to solve the problem together? 2 are okay and 3 are okay. And furthermore, if we think about the elided answers, we observe the similar contrast. How many students are allowed to solve the problem together? 2 or 3. Perfect. 2 and 3. Not so good. So let's see the puzzles again. 1, why disjunctive higher order answer is acceptable despite that the double complement is singular or more modified. 2, what causes the disjunction conjunction symmetry in high order ratings of these questions. There is a third question. How come the uniqueness inference can be local? To solve this puzzle, there are two general directions. One is the special rating choice. Namely, we treat the rating that rejects conjunctive answers as special high order rating, which makes use of additional devices such as maybe syntactic reconstruction, and it allows uniqueness to be interpreted local. But this is not the option that I will present today. Instead, I will talk about a uniform approach, which treats the conjunctive admitting rating and conjunction rejecting rating as the same rating. The idea is that some Boolean disjunctions can be atomic or cardinal. But for uniqueness, the local uniqueness effect is explained is for independent reason, and I'll explain that in a separate paper. So let's see the uniform analysis. The direction of this analysis comes from a personal communication with my Chris. The idea is very, very simple. Just like entities, disjunctions, but not conjunctions, can be atomic or cardinal. To determine whether a genus quantifier is atomic or cardinal, we're going to look at two relevant sets. One is the minimum witness set, one is the smallest event set. For any pi of type ETT, pi is atomic if, first, every minimum witness set is a singleton set. So that rules out the conjunction AB because the minimum witness set is not a singleton set. Furthermore, second, every member in the smallest event set of pi is atomic, and that rules out the Montaguvian the non-atomic multiplicative individual, as well as any disjunction that involves such a non-atomic individual. And cardinality can be defined in exactly the same way. So with this analysis, we can make several. There's some simple consequences of this analysis. First, the edge shifter can be applied to the small np of any noun. In a singular or numeral modified noun, the singular feature or the cardinality predicate rules out most generous quantifiers except a few Boolean disjunctions that are atomic or cardinal. So for the singular noun child, without edge shifter, with 3 children ABC in discourse domain, child refers to the set including ABC. With the presence of edge, it refers to the set including the corresponding multiplicative individuals as well as their unions. Similarly, for numeral modified noun, 2 children, without edge shifter, it refers to a set including the relevant plural individuals with cardinality 2. With edge, it refers to corresponding multiplicative individuals as well as their unions. So everything is uniform now. And furthermore, for high order ratings of Dutch questions, they can be derived uniformly in 2 steps. First, applying an edge shifter to the small np within Debit complement yields a high order Q domain. And second, just like what we said before, the Debit phrase binds a high order trace. 31 is the case, illustrates the case of questions with necessity model. 32 illustrates questions with the stubborn corrective predicate, and 33 is for questions with possibility model. So for the conjunctive mention all, previously we said that conjunctive mention all is derived if pi takes scope above the possibility model, and now this option is out because there's no conjunction in answer space. Well, for the other options, disjunctions are still available, so we can have mention all answers derived by disjunctions. And so that's why we also see a contrast between disjunctions and conjunctions in the mention all ratings of diamond questions. In terms of summary, the derivation is exactly what I said before, but in terms of distribution, there's an update. Any Debit phrase may license a high order rating if the Debit complement is singular or numeral modified. The atomicity or cardinality requirement of singular or card will rule out most elements in H and P except a few disjunctions, and it causes disjunction conjunction asymmetry. For part D, this is on semantic constraints on high order answers. This part is sort of independent from the previous 2 parts on distributing and deriving high order ratings to questions. So in part A, we have seen that the Q domain yielded by semantically unmarked Debit phrase contains a list conjunctions and disjunctions over the extension of Debit complement, as well as the Boolean coordinations. Now we might ask, is it okay that we extend to other high order meanings, saying that the Q domain yielded by a semantic unmarked Debit phrase consists of all generous quantifiers ranging over a subset of denotation of Debit complement and all of the Boolean combinations of these generous quantifiers. So this is a very strong claim. Or put the question in a different way. In other words, are there generous quantifiers that we shouldn't put them into the Q domain? And in this section, I'll show that we definitely have some constraints as to what kind of generous quantifiers can be used as semantic answers to questions. To determine whether a generous quantifier should be excluded, we can use a test that is based on the completeness condition of question embedding. So this condition says for a question embedding sentence like X knows Q, it implies the inference that X knows the complete true answer of Q. This test is generalized from Spector 2008. It says for any proposition P that names a short answer alpha to an exhaustive question Q, if there is a world in which P and XQ are both true, but X knows P isn't true, then we can conclude two exclusions. P is not in the Hamming set of the question, and alpha is not in the Q domain of the question. Let's see an example. Here we're looking at the context that describes John's summer reading obligations. There are two obligations. A, he has to read at least 2 French books. B, he has to read no Russian novel because he has already read too many. And we're asked to judge the inferences of the sentence in 34. Sue knows which books John has to read this summer. Okay, everyone get the context? In this context, 34 implies that Sue knows about the reading obligation A, which names an increasing quantifier at least 2 French novels. So that shows that we shouldn't exclude the increasing quantifier at least 2 French novels. In contrast, it does not imply that Sue knows about reading obligation B, that John has to read no Russian novel. So this shows that we shouldn't include the decreasing quantifier no Russian novel. And also it does not imply that Sue knows the coordination of these two inferences just because of logic. So to root out decreasing quantifiers and the non-monotonic quantifier, which is the coordination between A and B, Spector argues that the higher order meanings in the Q domain of a adaptive question must be increasing. What I'm going to do next is thinking about the consequences of applying this test to a broader range of John's quantifiers. So the example here is just repeating what we have, but I'm going to add one more piece of ingredients. So in addition to requirements A and B, there is an additional reading requirement that John has to read exactly 2 Chinese novels. With this new added reading requirement, it seems that 35 also implies that Sue knows that John has to read exactly 2 Chinese novels. So Spector's increasing GQ requirement seems to be too strong because it also rules out the non-monotonic John's quantifier exactly 2 Chinese novels. And more generally speaking, any monotonicity-based requirement will face a dilemma in the sense that it cannot distinguish between these 2 non-monotonic John's quantifiers. One is the coordination between A and B, one is the simplex non-monotonic GQC. I also want to mention that it's not just about differentiating between simplex and complex non-monotonic GQs, because we definitely have complex ones that should be included and the simplex ones that should not be included. So I'm going to claim that whether a genus quantifier can be included in the Q domain of a question is not determined by its monotonicity. Instead, it's a property which I will refer to as positiveness. A genus quantifier being positive means that it ensures existence with respect to the set it ranges over. So for example, exact 2 books entails the existence of some books, while every book or no book does not entail the existence of some book. Formally speaking, for any pi of type ETT, pi is positive if and only if pi is a subset of the genus quantifier derived by applying substantial quantification over the set that pi ranges over. So now let's compare the 2 properties, increasingness and positiveness. All the increasing quantifiers are positive. All the decreasing quantifiers are not positive. Well, for non-monotonic quantifiers, some are positive, some are not. So at least we're reaching a stage where we see different predictions. So the preliminary idea is that there's a positive GQ constraint which says genus quantifiers in the Q domain of the adaptive question must be positive. So far, with the positive GQ constraint, we have successfully rooted in the increasing quantifier at least 2a, and the non-monotonic quantifier exact 2a. And both of them ensures existence with respect to some element in A. However, Benjamin Spector points out that this seems to be wrong. Positiveness does not exclude many unwanted non-monotonic GQ coordinations like the one that we said before, every article and notebook. So when you say every A and no B, the smallest event set is the union between A and B. And it doesn't entail the existence of something that's either A or B. So that's not a good result. Taking one step back, it seems that we were wrong that the previous idea was looking at positiveness with respect to the entire generous quantifier, but that's not the correct direction. Instead, we should look at the two components of that generous quantifier. One is the decreasing part, one is the increasing part. So we need to examine whether existence is ensured homogeneously with respect to the range over set of the coordinate increasing generous quantifier as well as that of the coordinate decreasing quantifier. Formally speaking, I propose that for any pi of type ETT, pi is homogeneously positive if and only if it ensures two things. It entails the existence of something in the range over set of pi plus. Pi plus is the strongest increasing GQ entailed by pi, and that can be defined in terms of a subset relation. And also ensures the existence of something in the range over set of pi minus, where pi minus is the strongest decreasing GQ entailed by pi and can be defined in terms of superset relation. So for an illustration, think about the three quantifiers again. For all the three generous quantifiers, the smallest event set of pi minus is the set A. And this is ensured in all cases. However, for pi minus, the strongest decrease in GQ, there is a very interesting contrast. For the increasing generous quantifier, pi minus is basically trivial and range over the set, range over discourse domain. While for the complex GQ coordination area A and no B, the smallest event set of pi minus is the set that no B ranges over, which is B, and the area A and no B does not entail the existence of B. So given this contrast, we can conclude that the first two generous quantifiers are homogeneous positive, and last one is not. So that captures the contrast nicely. And now I'm going to revise the previously assumed positive GQ constraint to something I call as homo-positive GQ constraint. Generous quantifiers in the Q domain of that question must be homogeneously positive. And this table illustrates a broader range of generous quantifiers and looking at three parameters: monotonicity, positiveness, and homo-positiveness. You can say that for all the simplex quantifiers, that can be decomposed into a determiner and a set of entities. Whether they are positive and whether they are homogeneous positive, the pattern is pretty much the same. The pattern is the same. While for a complex quantifier, there will be distinctions. So in particular, area A but no B is positive, but is not homogeneously positive. Interim summary: not all generous quantifiers can be used as semantic answers to Derivation questions. In general, increasing generous quantifiers are qualified, but decreasing quantifiers are not. We also observe there's some subtle variations among the non-monotonic GQs and account for those variations in terms of a new property which I call as homopositiveness. Where does this homopositiveness come from? I don't know yet. Maybe it's in the lexicon of the edge shifter, maybe it's an existential presupposition of the higher order trace, maybe it's a constraint on semantic reconstruction, or maybe it's just a matter of pragmatics. And I have to leave that for future research. Conclusions. In this talk, I presented evidence for the existence of higher order ratings. Evidence from questions with necessity modals or starbly predicates argues that sometimes a adaptive question must be interpreted with a high order rating. As for the derivation, high order ratings arise if the edge shifter converts the adaptive restrictor into a set of generous quantifiers and adaptive phrase binds a high order trace. Hence, accordingly, high order ratings are unavailable if the use of the edge shifter is somehow blocked. Yet later we observe a very interesting asymmetry. Puzzlingly, singular and numeral modified questions admit elided disjunctive answers, even though they reject elided conjunctive answers. And there are two ways to capture the symmetry. I present a uniform approach, which says that disjunctions, but not conjunctions, may satisfy the atomicity or cardinality constraints of singular and numeral modified nouns. And finally, in regards to what kind of generous quantifiers could serve as semantic answers to questions, I'll argue for a homopositive GQ constraint, which says generous quantifiers that can serve as semantic answers to adaptive questions must be homogeneously positive. And that's all for today. Thank you very much for your attention.